Ever watch one of those room dramas and kind of thought, hold on, what just happened?
Yeah, yeah.
Like when a piece of evidence is suddenly thrown out or like some legal term changes everything.
Totally.
Well, that's kind of what today's deep dive is all about. We're giving you that legal eagle advantage,
Yeah. Exactly.
even if you've never even thought about law school.
It's really amazing how much stuff just hinges on these like seemingly small legal concepts.
Right.
And these aren't just for lawyers either. Like understanding these things can give you a whole new perspective on like news, true crime,
Oh, totally.
even just fictional stories.
Exactly. And to like really help us unpack all of this, we've got a fantastic lineup of concepts. So we're going to tackle first res gestae,
Okay.
which is basically like a loophole in the hearsay rule. Then we'll look at the difference between a judge messing up the facts of a case versus like messing up the law itself.
Right. Big difference.
Huge. And finally, we'll explore that last-ditch appeal option,
Oh, yeah.
plain error.
Plain error, yeah. What's so fascinating about these three is how much they kind of come together
Yes.
in real cases. Like they really show how much strategy and nuance is involved.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of strategy, a huge shout out to Joseph E. Sapp and Legal Writing USA for supporting this deep dive.
Absolutely.
They definitely know a thing or two about navigating the legal world, right?
Yeah. Over 31 years of experience.
And a law degree from the University of Georgia.
Exactly. So they've been providing the right answers to hard questions since 1992.
Wow.
And, that's exactly what we're aiming to do today, give you those like aha moments about the law.
Okay, let's kick things off with res gestae. Now, most people have heard of the hearsay rule.
Right.
You can't just bring in random statements said outside of court. Right.
Right.
That's evidence. But res gestae from the Latin things done is like this sneaky little exception.
Yeah. It's all about capturing the immediacy of a situation.
Okay.
So imagine a hit and run. Okay. A witness, still shaken up,
Right.
just blurts out, that red car just sped away. Normally, that'd be hearsay.
Right.
But under res gestae, it could be admissible because it's so closely tied to, like, the event.
It's like their brain is still processing what just happened.
Right.
So they're less likely to be making stuff up.
Exactly. Exactly. It's seen as like a spontaneous reaction,
Right.
not some carefully planned out statement. But here's where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
If you were the judge, like, how would you even determine what even qualifies as related to the event?
That's a good question.
Where do you even draw the line?
I mean, I guess it would depend on the situation.
Yeah.
Like if the witness said, that red car I saw at the grocery store earlier,
Yeah.
probably, too far removed.
You're getting it. And that's why res gestae is so controversial, right? On the one hand, it can paint a more complete picture
Sure.
of what happened. But then on the other hand, are those like raw, unfiltered statements truly reliable? Could they be influenced by like emotion, shock,
Right.
even like faulty memory?
It's almost like a philosophical question
Totally.
about the nature of truth, isn't it? Like, are our gut reactions more honest? Or are they just as susceptible to like bias as anything else?
And that's why good lawyering is so important, because arguing for or against the admissibility of res gestae
Oh, for sure.
can completely change how a trial goes.
Totally. So it's not just about understanding the concept, but like how it actually plays out in, a legal setting.
Exactly, precisely. And speaking of legal arenas, let's move on to another situation that can make or break a case. When judges make mistakes.
Ooh, okay. This is where things get really interesting because there's a big difference between a judge getting the facts wrong and getting the law wrong.
Right. Imagine a judge in a car accident case.
Okay.
Let's say they misinterpret, like the police report, and conclude that the defendant was speeding when they weren't. That's getting the facts wrong.
So it's like they're misreading the evidence.
Yeah.
Or maybe giving too much weight to like one piece of evidence over another.
Exactly. It's all about their judgment and interpretation of the facts that are like presented in the case.
Okay.
Now, contrast that with a judge who completely misunderstands, let's say, a traffic law. Like they think driving 10 miles per hour over the speed limit is always illegal.
Right.
Even if it's safe to do so on certain roads.
Whoa, so in that case, they've gotten the actual law wrong.
Exactly.
Not just how it applies to the facts of the case.
You got it. And this distinction is super important, especially when it comes to appeals. because challenging a judge's mistake on the facts, totally different from challenging their understanding of the law.
So knowing the difference between these two types of errors is like having a secret decoder ring for understanding legal arguments.
Totally.
It helps you see why some appeals work and others don't.
Absolutely. And that's why we're digging into this stuff, to give you that like insider knowledge.
Yeah.
So you can follow these real life cases and spot those like crucial turning points.
And I bet our friends at Legal Writing USA see these kinds of errors all the time, right?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak for them specifically.
Of course.
But it's safe to say that experience really matters in these situations. Knowing how to like argue these fine distinctions can make all the difference.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered res gestae and these different ways that judges can, mess up.
Right.
Now let's talk about that Hail Mary pass of appeals.
Oh, yeah.
Plain error.
Plain error. So imagine a trial, right?
Okay.
Where something goes seriously wrong. Like some evidence is introduced that totally shouldn't have been allowed. But for whatever reason, no one objects at the time.
So wait, even if it's a blatant mistake, you can't just bring it up later on appeal?
Usually not, no.
Okay.
But plain error is this like rare exception.
Sure.
It's like saying, look, this error was so obvious, it's so messed up the fairness of the trial that we have to address it.
I see.
Even if it wasn't raised before.
So it's not just about like finding an error.
Right.
It's about proving that error was so big.
Exactly.
That it literally changed the outcome of the case.
You got it. Think of it this way. You're a bird watcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at this flock of sheep.
Yep.
And suddenly you see a duck just right there in the middle of them.
Okay.
It's so out of place.
Yeah.
So obvious that you just can't ignore it.
This is a great analogy.
Right.
So plain error is like that duck.
Exactly.
It just stands out. You can't pretend it isn't there.
Exactly. But, appellate courts, they don't use this lightly.
Right. Yeah.
It's really for like exceptional situations where, justice demands intervention.
It's almost like a last resort.
Right.
Like a safety valve.
Yeah.
To correct those really egregious mistakes.
Exactly.
That slip through the cracks.
And it can be a double-edged sword, right?
Oh, sure.
It can overturn wrongful convictions, but it can also overturn wins.
Right. If the winning side made a major blunder.
Makes sense.
So it's not a guaranteed win for either side.
This is all so fascinating. It's like peeling back the layers of the legal system and seeing how it all works.
Yeah.
It's definitely making me think about those courtroom dramas in a whole new light.
And that's exactly the point of this whole deep dive.
Okay.
We want to give you that deeper understanding.
Yes.
That ability to, like, analyze these legal situations. See beyond just the surface.
So far, we've covered some pretty intense stuff. Res gestae, those tricky judicial errors.
Yeah.
And the high-stakes world of plain error. But there's more to come. And I have a feeling it's going to get even more interesting.
Stay tuned. We're just getting started.
Right.
It's interesting, isn't it, how these concepts aren't just like abstract ideas.
Right.
They have real-world consequences.
It's easy to get caught up in the technicalities.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about fairness.
And justice. And making sure the system works.
And speaking of fairness, even with all these rules and safeguards, like the legal system isn't perfect.
Of course not.
There are always going to be gray areas and
for sure
tough calls.
Like with res gestae.
Exactly.
We talked about how tricky it can be
to
determine which statements are truly those spontaneous reactions.
Yeah. Seems like there's a lot of room for interpretation there.
Totally. Absolutely. And that's where that judicial discretion comes in, right?
Right.
Judges have to weigh the value of that statement.
Right.
Made in the heat of the moment.
Right.
Against the risk of it being like unreliable or misleading.
It makes you wonder about the psychology of it all, too.
Totally.
Like, how much can we trust those gut reactions?
Right.
Do they reveal our true thoughts and feelings, or are they just influenced by stress or other factors?
That's a question that psychologists and legal scholars have been, like, grappling with for ages.
It's a fascinating area, really. Like, the intersection of law, human behavior, and the search for truth.
It reminds me of all those true crime documentaries.
Oh, yeah.
Where one tiny little detail can just, like, totally change a case.
For sure.
It really shows how important it is to, like, look at everything.
Yes.
And consider the context.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive, to give you the knowledge to think critically
Totally.
about these issues and form your own opinions.
So next time you're watching one of those courtroom dramas or reading about a big case,
Yeah.
keep these concepts in mind. Res gestae, abusive discretion versus legal error and plain error.
Yeah.
They give you a whole new level of understanding.
Exactly. And you'll start to notice those subtle legal maneuvers. It's like having X-ray vision.
Haha, I love it.
Oh.
Okay, ready for another legal concept that might surprise you?
Get me.
This one's called the Doctrine of Lenity.
Okay.
And it's all about ambiguity in criminal law.
So what's interesting about the doctrine of lenity is that it basically says, if a criminal law is unclear
Okay.
or open to multiple interpretations, the court should interpret it in favor of the defendant.
Wait, so if the law itself is vague, the benefit of the doubt goes to the accused.
Yeah.
That seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, but that's the point.
Okay.
The doctrine of lenity is there to make sure that people have fair notice
Right.
of what's considered criminal. If a law is so unclear that it's open to a bunch of interpretations, it's not really fair to punish someone for maybe breaking a rule they didn't even know existed.
I see. So it's like one of those faded no parking signs.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't want to get a ticket for parking there if you couldn't even read the sign.
Exactly. And the doctrine of lenity prevents that kind of thing from happening, from working against the defendant in, criminal cases. It puts the burden of being clear on the lawmakers, not on the people accused of breaking it.
So it's like a safeguard in the system to protect people from being punished unfairly.
Right.
For, laws that aren't clear.
Exactly. And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier, about legal error. If a judge misinterprets, a vague law, and then convicts someone based on that, that could be grounding in appeal.
Interesting.
And the doctrine of lenity could come into play in that appeal.
Right, and potentially get that conviction overturned.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these concepts are all connected.
It's like this giant puzzle.
Yeah.
Where all the pieces are different legal concepts.
I like that.
And understanding how they fit together really gives you a deeper appreciation for the law.
For sure. It's like we're building our own little mental legal encyclopedia.
Exact.
Maybe this will come in handy someday.
You never know. Understanding these things might give you an edge, whether it's navigating a contract or analyzing a news story.
Totally.
Even just holding your own in a debate.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty serious legal topics.
Yeah.
But we're not done yet.
Okay.
There's one more area we need to explore. One that takes us to this fascinating intersection of law and politics.
Ooh. Okay, this is where we get into non-justiciability and the political question doctrine. I know those sound kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
But they're actually pretty straightforward.
All right, lay it on me. What are these concepts all about?
When we talk about something being non-justiciable, we're basically saying that it's not something courts are equipped to handle.
So, it's outside their jurisdiction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are certain issues that are considered, off limits.
So what kind of issues fall into that category?
Typically, there are issues that are super political, involving policy or decisions that are better left to the other branches of government.
I see. So it's about recognizing those limits to judicial power and respecting the separation of powers between the different, branches.
Exactly. And the political question doctrine is a specific type of non-justiciability. It deals with questions that are so political that the courts just, believe they shouldn't intervene.
So it's like drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
And saying, this is where the court's authority ends.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that some issues are just better resolved. Through democratic means,
Elections.
Yeah, elections.
Legislation.
Got it. Can you give us an example of that? Something we might actually see, in the news.
Okay, imagine there's a dispute over a new law.
Okay.
The opposing party says it's unconstitutional. But the courts might not want to step in and overturn something passed by, elected officials.
That makes sense. It would be a delicate situation.
Yes. It's about maintaining that balance of power, making sure each branch of government stays in its lane.
It's like this delicate balance between law and politics, where each side has to kind of respect the other's steps. Right. And the courts, by using this political question doctrine, are essentially saying, we're not leading this dance.
Nice.
We'll leave that to the politicians.
That's a fascinating example of how legal principles can actually, shape the relationship between different branches of government and influence, democracy.
And it shows how important it is to understand these things, not just for lawyers,
Right.
but for any engaged citizen.
For sure. Because when we understand the rules of the game, we can play it better.
Exactly.
And advocate for what we want to see.
And we're less likely to be caught off guard, like by some surprise res gestae exception or something.
Exactly. It's all about empowering ourselves with this knowledge.
Yeah.
And using it to understand this world of law and politics.
And if you ever need help, figuring this stuff out, remember that Joseph E. Sapp and the folks over at Legal Writing USA are always there to help.
They've been providing those answers since 1992. So they definitely know what they're doing.
Whether you're dealing with some personal legal challenge or just wanting to understand this stuff better, they're a great resource.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from res gestae to this political question doctrine. But there's one more thought-provoking concept I want to touch on.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's this last intriguing idea?
I remember how we started talking about those aha moments, courtroom dramas.
Right.
This last concept is kind of all about that. This legal principle can literally rewrite how a trial ends.
Oh, wow.
Even if no one caught the mistake.
You must be talking about the doctrine of lenity. It's amazing how that protects people from being penalized for unclear laws.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And it really shows how the law tries to, balance holding people accountable while also making sure the rules are, fair and understandable.
It's a good reminder that the legal system isn't just about punishing people.
Right.
It's about, upholding justice.
Totally.
Making sure everyone gets a fair shot.
It also makes you think about those cases where the law is clear.
Right.
But the judge just applies it wrong.
Right. We
talked about that.
Yeah.
Getting the facts wrong versus the law.
Those are huge distinctions, especially on appeal.
Huge.
And it highlights how important expertise is, to navigate these arguments.
Well, totally.
It's not always black and white.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
That's why having someone like Joseph E. Sapp on your side can make all the difference.
For sure.
With his, decades of experience at Legal Writing USA.
Exactly.
He knows how to spot those little details.
Yeah.
And build a strong case. Speaking of strong cases, let's go back to res gestae for a sec.
Okay.
It's not just some, theoretical thing.
Right.
It really affects how evidence is presented, how cases are decided.
It really does. And it raises some questions about, human behavior.
Totally.
How we react in those, high-stress moments.
Do you think our immediate words, our actions, are a more reliable reflection of the truth? Or are they just, influenced by emotions, by the chaos of everything?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I know.
Legal scholars, psychologists, been debating this forever. Are those gut reactions just pure instinct?
Right.
Or are they all, messed up by our perceptions and biases?
It makes you wonder how much weight we should give to those spontaneous statements. Is it really fair to use them as evidence?
Yeah.
Even if they contradict what someone says later?
It's a tough one. We want to look at all the evidence.
Yeah.
But we also got to be aware of, possible manipulation and how unreliable memory can be.
Thinking about those true crime documentaries again.
Oh, yeah.
Where one tiny detail can change the whole thing.
Exactly.
It really highlights, the importance of context.
Yes.
And understanding how the legal process actually works.
And that's exactly why we do this whole deep dive. We want to give you that knowledge.
Totally.
To analyze this stuff and form your own opinions.
So next time you're watching a legal drama, or reading about some court case, keep all this in mind. Res gestae.
Yes.
Abusive discretion versus legal error.
Right.
And plain error. It'll give you a whole new perspective.
It really will. And it might even spark some, fun debates.
I love it.
But remember, if you're ever facing something in real life, it's best to talk to the pros.
Right. Like the folks at Legal Writing USA.
Exactly. They've been giving people answers since 1992.
Wow, that's a long time.
So they know their stuff.
Well, folks, that's the end of our deep dive into these, legal concepts. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling a lot more equipped to, decode all those courtroom dramas.
Me too. I hope our listeners are too. The law can seem so complicated, but understanding these core concepts can really give you a new way of looking at the world.
Huge thanks to Joseph E. Sapp.
Yes.
And the whole team over at Legal Writing USA.
Absolutely.
For making this deep dive possible. They've been providing this legal guidance for over 30 years.
It's incredible.
So grateful for their support. We encourage everyone to check them out, Legal Writing USA, for all your legal writing needs.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep those legal gears turning.
Great advice.
Stay curious, folks, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of our Notebook Deep Dive podcast. These podcasts are based on either books, essays, or lectures I have written or given over the last 3 decades.